This treatment is a direct continuation of the events of Episode 7, Echoes of the Force. The core philosophy of this project remains to create a direct, unified narrative that builds logically upon the events of the previous film and the original Trilogy, providing a sense of meaningful victory and clear stakes for the original heroes while introducing new, compelling threats. These pages are not finalized screenplays. They are detailed narrative outlines and scene scripts intended to capture the tone, pacing, and core thematic beats of the story. While they include dialogue, there is immense room for additional scenes, deeper character interactions, and further military and political world-building to be explored in a full script. So let's begin. Star Wars, Episode 8, Shadows of the Past. While the Republic celebrates a fragile peace, Grand Admiral Thrawn has vanished, his so-called defeat at Dathomir hailed as the end of the Imperial threat. But in the dark between stars, an ancient power stirs once more. From the dying heart of a distant sun, a new fleet is being forged, not of metal and code, but of hunger and will. As the New Republic turns inward, Jedi Master Luke Skywalker and his ally Ezra Bridger search the Force for answers. What they find will draw them into the shadows of forgotten wars and toward the rebirth of a darkness thought long dead. The void of the Thalar expanse was not true blackness, but a seething tapestry of violent color. Nebulae of deep red and bruised violet churned in silent, perpetual storm, their extremely bright gases twisting into shapes that resembled massive serpents. Gravitational anomalies warped the light of distant stars, making them flicker like dying candles. It was a place of distorted sensors and treacherous space, a perfect shroud for secrets. At its heart, where the cosmic storms were most fierce, hung the prize of a massive red star. The Starforge was not a thing of clean lines and welded plates. It was a massive, automated orbital factory resembling a giant, intricate space station, with a central spherical structure and 3 large fins radiating outwards. The massive fins extended down to the star, drawing molten energy, siphoned from the star's death throes in vast, screaming streams, twisted and coiled into the forge's superstructure. The process was not one of construction, but of grotesque birth. The new metal pulsed with a faint internal light, and the shapes it formed were unsettlingly organic, curved and predatory. The first ships of this new fleet drifted in a silent, nascent armada around their creator. They were black, sleek and silent, their hulls seeming to absorb the very light around them, their forms more like turtle shells than hulls. On the bridge of the Imperial Star Destroyer Chimera, the view was both magnificent and terrifying. Grand Admiral Thrawn stood before the main viewport, a statue of calm amidst the stellar fury. His hands were clasped behind his back, his white uniform a stark contrast to the hellish red glow bathing the command deck. He did not merely observe, he absorbed the spectacle, his glowing red eyes tracing the flow of energy, the formation of each new vessel, as if reading a symphony in a language only he could understand. Captain Gilad Pellaeon approached, the measured click of his boots on the deck the only sound that dared interrupt the silence. He came to a halt a respectful distance behind Thrawn, his own gaze fixed on the scene outside. The sight filled him with a deep, unshakable unease. "The final synchronization sequence is initiating, Admiral," Pellaeon reported, his voice tight. He paused, gathering his courage. "Sir, with all due respect, you cannot possibly intend to fully power this thing. It is ancient sorcery, not strategy. It defies every principle of Imperial engineering." Thrawn did not turn. "Sorcery is merely science that refuses classification, Captain. A label applied to phenomena we have not yet codified. The principles are the same: cause and effect, input and output. We are merely using a different source of fuel. And you would trust them to control it?" Pellaeon asked, his voice dropping as he gestured subtly towards the rear of the bridge. There, In a space cleared between the command stations stood the three Great Mothers. Their withered forms were shrouded in robes that seemed woven from shadow and dust. Their eyes were closed, their skeletal hands raised as if conducting the stellar tempest outside. A low, guttural chant drifted from them, a sound that was less heard and more felt, a vibration that crawled up the spine and settled in the teeth. The very air around them grew cold, and the lights on the bridge flickered in time with their incantation. "Control is irrelevant," Thrawn stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "The Forge has no will, only appetite. An instinct to consume and create. The Mothers will feed it. I will teach it discipline. I will give it direction." Pellaeon shook his head, a gesture of despair he would never have allowed himself in front of any other commanding officer. "You would build hell to defend heaven." Now, Thrawn turned, his red eyes locking onto Pellaeon's. The intensity of his gaze was paralyzing. "I would build necessity, Captain. The New Republic is a choir without a conductor, each voice singing a different tune. They celebrate their victory at Dathomir, blind to the fact it was a deliberate withdrawal, a tactical feint. When the next true war comes, they will drown in their own dissonant harmony." He turned back to the viewport, stepping closer until his reflection was superimposed over the raging star. The red light cut sharp, angular lines across his sharp cheekbones and pale blue skin. "Look at how they fought us. They lost ships, personnel, and morale with every engagement. Their fleets fractured, their command structure hesitated, their courage turned to bureaucracy. That was their first test, the smallest taste of what waits beyond their borders. And they could not defeat an enemy who was never truly there to be defeated in the first place." Pellaeon felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "Then what is coming?" Thrawn's eyes narrowed, staring into the abyss as if he could see the future forming in the nebulous gas. Something that does not reason, something that does not negotiate, something that does not stop. It moves in silence, shaping the void itself. It is a force of nature, Captain, and if it reaches us unopposed, there will be no republic, no empire, no galaxy as we know it. There will only be ash and an orderless dark. A long, heavy silence stretched between them, filled only by the unnerving chant of the Great Mothers. Then, a low, resonant hum began to build, vibrating through the deck plates. The Starforge, responding to the directed will of the witches, began to awaken in earnest. The streams of molten energy from the star intensified, becoming blinding. Tendrils that shrieked as they coiled around the forge's rings. The metal itself seemed to groan, a sound of ancient pain and awakening power. Pellaeon watched, horrified and mesmerized, as the skeletal frames of new warships began to form within the coils of energy, growing like metallic tumors. "And you believe this? This machine can save us?" "Not save," Thrawn corrected, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was all the more chilling for its calm. "Prepare." The voices of the Great Mothers climbed from a chant to a piercing, unified scream that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. In response, the star itself convulsed. A final, massive tendril of its lifeblood ripped away and funneled into the forge. From the heart of the luminous storm, the first completed warship of the new fleet emerged. It was larger than the others, its hull a seamless, obsidian black, curved like a predator's tooth. It did not move like a machine. It glided, alive and hungry, its engines glowing with the same baleful red as the dying sun. Thrawn watched its first silent turn, a look of pure intellectual satisfaction on his face. "They will call it tyranny," he said softly, almost to himself. "Later, they will call it survival." The chamber was quiet, a sanctuary of solitude aboard the New Republic frigate. The only sound was the deep, resonant hum of the engines, a steady heartbeat vibrating through the durasteel floor. It was a comforting sound, one that spoke of motion and purpose, but to Luke Skywalker, it felt like the pretense of peace. He stood before the curved viewport, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze lost in the infinite star-strewn blackness. The reflection staring back at him was not that of a victorious Jedi Master, but of a man burdened by a truth no one else could see. The celebration throughout the fleet was palpable, a wave of relief and triumph that he could feel even through the insulated walls. They called it victory. The Battle of Dathomir was over, Thrawn had vanished, and the New Republic had held the line. But the Force told him otherwise. It whispered of absence where there should be presence, of silence where there should be echo. So many lives had been spent, so much hope invested. And for what? To chase a shadow that had willingly retreated? The Republic celebrated while the galaxy, in the quiet, unobserved corners, mourned in a silence that was more profound than any explosion. A faint shimmer began to form in the air behind him, a coalescence of light and memory. The light softened, taking on a blue hue and resolved into the spectral form of Anakin Skywalker. He stood not as Darth Vader, the scarred monster in black armor, but as the man he had been in his final moments, weary and saddened, yet finally at peace. His presence was not an intrusion, but a warmth that gently pushed back against the cold dread in Luke's soul. "They call it victory," Luke said, his voice low, not turning from the viewport. He was speaking to the reflection, to the ghost, to himself. Anakin's voice was calm, carrying the weight of centuries and regret. "I know that feeling. It is a hollow echo in a vast chamber. During the Clone Wars, every battle, every campaign we won, felt just like that. Victory wrapped tightly, around a core of profound loss. We told ourselves it was for peace, that the ends justified the means. But peace built on ashes never lasts, Luke. It is a foundation of sand." Luke turned slightly, studying his father's ghostly form. The faint blue light glinted off the insignia on his own tunic. "Then we both know what comes next. Another war. Another list of names added to the memorials. I keep the names, Father. I remember them all. And I keep wondering if compassion is enough to stop the cycle. Is it enough to face what Thrawn is becoming?" "It is the only thing that ever could," Anakin replied, his gaze looking through Luke, into a past filled with fire and poor choices. "The Jedi of my time taught us to avoid attachment, to build walls around our hearts. In our fear of the dark side, we confused compassion with attachment. But they are not the same. Compassion is what gives meaning to everything we fight for. It is the light that makes the fight worthwhile. You are seeing that now, more clearly than I ever did. You are building your temple not on dogma, but on that compassion. You are doing what I couldn't." Luke's expression softened, a complex mix of gratitude and grief passing over his features. The weight of his father's legacy was a heavy cloak, but in moments like this, it was also a source of strength. "There's someone out there who needs that compassion now. Her name is Mara Jade. She's dangerous, skilled, and full of a rage that feels personal. But there's light buried under everything she's been told to be, everything she's been forced to become. I don't want to destroy her. I want to reach her, to show her what it's like when someone truly cares, without a command behind it, without fear motivating it." Anakin's form seemed to grow more solid, his voice gaining a new intensity. "I see the connection you are making, my son. I see the pattern. I was trained to see everyone as a potential threat, a possible loss. When I met your mother, Padme, her compassion was a light I had never known. It was not a weakness. It was her greatest strength. It was the one thing that could reach me when the darkness had consumed everything else." His voice grew thick with a sorrow that had not faded with death. "The old order would have forbidden what we had. They would have called it a dangerous attachment. But they were wrong. My fear of losing her, not my love for her, is what broke me. Love itself was never the poison. The poison was the terror of being alone in the galaxy without her light. Do not make the same mistake the Order did. Do not let your compassion for this woman be clouded by the fear of what she might do, or the fear of failing to save her. See her as Padme saw me, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be understood. That is how you truly reach someone. That is how you brought me back. As he spoke, the air in the room seemed to shift again. A new warmth blossomed, different from Anakin's. It was lighter, older, rooted in a deeper, more natural balance. The blue light of Anakin's form was joined by a gentle, golden radiance. Another figure materialized beside Anakin, serene and steady. Qui-Gon Jinn stood with a quiet authority, his eyes holding a timeless understanding. You are right to trust that instinct, Luke. Qui-Gon's voice was like the sound of a calm, deep river. Love and compassion were never the enemy of the Jedi. Only fear was. Fear of loss, fear of the future, fear of the power within. Show this woman peace, not restraint. Show her the strength that comes from vulnerability. Let her see the freedom that is born from kindness freely given. He paused, and a hint of a sad, knowing smile touched his lips. The path of a Jedi does not require a life of emotional solitude. Love, in its purest form, is a conduit to the light, not the dark. It is a commitment, a compassion that encompasses all life. I learned this lesson too late in my own life, but it is a truth I carry with me still. Luke looked between them, his father and his father's mentor, two ghosts, from a broken order standing before the man tasked with rebuilding it. They represented the two pillars upon which he had to build, the hard-won wisdom from failure and the unwavering principles that should have been the Order's guide. His father's words about Padme had struck a deep chord, reframing his thoughts of Mara not as a tactical dilemma, but as a human being trapped in a prison of her own past, much like his father had been. Then that's what I'll do, Luke said, his resolve solidifying. Anakin placed a spectral hand over his son's shoulder. Though no physical sensation of touch came, Luke felt a wave of reassurance, of pride, and of profound love flow through the Force. You already are, my son. You have been since the moment you refused to fight me on the Death Star. You are the Jedi I should have been. The ghosts began to fade, their light dimming slowly, their forms dissolving back into the energy from which they came. The ambient hum of the ship's systems seemed to grow louder, reclaiming the silence. Luke turned back to the viewport. This time, his reflection showed only himself, but he no longer felt alone in his burden. The door hissed open behind him with a soft sigh of pressurized air. You're talking to them again, huh? Ezra Bridger's voice was quiet, lacking its usual edge. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his own face marked by the same unspoken concerns. Luke offered a faint, tired smile. They still have a few things left to say. Then maybe it's time we start listening, Ezra said, pushing off the doorframe and coming to stand beside Luke. Together they looked out at the star-dusted void, two Jedi from different generations, bound by a war that refused to end. Luke nodded, the silence between them comfortable, filled with a shared understanding. The ship's hum filled the space, low and steady, the sound of a galaxy desperately pretending it had found a peace it had not earned. They're celebrating, Luke said after a long moment, his voice flat. The Senate is already declaring it the end of the war. But it isn't. It's a loss they don't have the eyes to see yet. Ezra let out a slow breath, his eyes distant, seeing not the stars but the memories of a different kind of battle. Yeah, I felt it. The whole thing was wrong. The way they disengaged, the precision of it. It was like someone let them win, like Thrawn wanted them to feel safe again. Thrawn doesn't fight for territory, Luke said, his gaze hardening as he focused on a particularly bright star. He fights for control of perception, for the narrative. The Republic thinks the threat is over, that the danger has passed. That is exactly what he wants them to think. He has maneuvered us all into a state of complacency. Then he's planning something bigger, Ezra concluded, his voice grim. Something the rest of us can't even conceive of. He's always 10 steps ahead, playing a game on a board we don't even know exists. Luke looked away from the viewport and, directly at Ezra, his expression grave. Then we'll look where they won't. Not through military reports or Senate intelligence briefings. We look through the Force itself. It showed us a glimpse on Dathomir. It's time we asked for more. Ezra gave a soft, grim grin. You mean... We meditate, Luke stated, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Together, we quiet our minds, we let go of our assumptions, and we follow where the Force leads us. It is the one map Thrawn cannot alter. Without another word, they moved to the center of the room, clearing a small space. On the cool deck, they both sank to their knees, their postures straight but relaxed. The lights in the chamber seemed to dim in response to their focused will, leaving only the soft, ethereal glow of hyperspace streaking past the viewport. Their breathing slowed, falling into a synchronized rhythm. The hum of the ship, the faint vibrations, the distant sounds of the crew. It all faded away, replaced by a profound, waiting silence. Darkness. Then, light. It was harsh, mechanical, and blinding. Shapes moved in the void of their shared vision, fleets of ships, endless and identical, their formations perfect and cold. Their engines did not glow with the blue of ion drives or the red of plasma, but with a sickly, pale green that felt like a sickness in the Force. A colossal structure pulsed in the distance, a ring of fire orbiting a dying blood-red star. It was the thing from Dathomir, but now it was awake, active, and ravenous. The sound of metal screaming filled the silence, a sound that twisted into whispers. They were the whispers of the Great Mothers, but amplified, distorted by a vast and ancient machine intelligence. They spoke of hunger, of consumption, of a void that could never be filled. Faces flashed before their inner eyes. Soldiers, civilians, beings from 1,000 worlds. Their features contorted in silent screams before vanishing into a consuming shadow. The feeling was of something ancient awakening, something that was cold, intelligent, and utterly devoid of life. It was order without soul, pattern without purpose. And through it all, a single, chilling presence presided. It was Thrawn's will, the conductor of this silent, galactic symphony of consumption. Ezra gasped, his body jolting as the light from the vision spilled across his face like a lightning strike. He broke from the trance, his chest heaving. Luke's eyes snapped open a moment later, but his gaze remained fixed on some distant internal point, his face a mask of grim realization. His voice was barely a whisper, laden with dread. What is that? Ezra shook his head, trying to clear the horrific imagery. It felt alive, but not through the Force. It was something else, something darker. It was feeding. An echo of something that shouldn't exist, Luke murmured, finally blinking and looking at Ezra. A perversion of creation itself. They sat in silence for a long moment, the normal sounds of the ship slowly filtering back into their awareness. But the vision clung to them, a psychic residue that filled the room with a palpable chill. Ezra hugged his knees to his chest, a rare gesture of vulnerability. Wherever that was, it's calling to us. I can still feel it. A pull. It's far, but it feels near at the same time. Like a black hole you can't see, but you can feel its gravity. Luke stood slowly, his movements deliberate. He walked back to the viewport and looked out, as if the coordinates to this new nightmare were written in the stars. Then that's where we go. No Senate, no committees, no orders. Only the Force. It showed us this for a reason. It is a warning. And what if it's leading us into a trap? Ezra asked, voicing the fear that hung in the air between them. Then we'll learn why, Luke said, his voice calm but filled with an iron resolve. "We will look this thing in the eye and understand its nature. That is our duty." They exchanged a look. It was a calm, determined understanding that carried the kind of courage that doesn't need to shout. It was the quiet agreement of those who know they are walking into the dark and are prepared to become the light within it. Luke clipped his lightsaber to his belt, the action final and decisive. "Prepare the ship," he said, his voice quiet but clear in the silent chamber. "We follow the disturbance." Without consulting a nav computer, without calculating a single coordinate, Luke closed his eyes, placed his hands on the controls, and reached out with his feelings. He trusted the current of the Force completely. The stars outside the viewport elongated into blinding streaks of blue, and the ship leapt into the heart of the unknown. The war room aboard the New Republic cruiser Resolute was a bubble of tense order suspended in the serene beauty of space. Through the sweeping main viewport, the planet Chandrila glowed like a blue and white jewel, its surface a picture of tranquil oceans and unspoiled continents. It was the image of a fragile peace, a world pretending the galaxy's wounds were healed. Inside the room, the illusion shattered against the hard, angular lines of tactical displays and the low, urgent murmur of command staff. Princess Leia, Organa, stood at the center of it all, her hands resting on the cool surface of a circular holotable. Her eyes scanned the scrolling security reports, her mind piecing together fragments of data into a worrying, incomplete mosaic. Supply lines disrupted, unexplained sensor ghosts in the outer rim, whispers from her contacts that felt more like echoes in a tomb. Nearby, Han Solo leaned against a console, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His posture was a study in contained impatience, his gaze flicking with open irritation towards a comms channel where the droning voices of Senate delegates debated procedural minutiae. "The Subcommittee on Hyperspace Lane Taxation will now hear testimony from the Corporate Sector Authority," a tinny voice announced from the speaker. Han rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. "Yeah, that'll stop Thrawn. Hit him with a revised tax form." The soft hiss of the door sliding open cut through his grumbling. A holoprojector on the table flickered to life, its emitters casting a pale blue glow that pushed back the room's ambient lighting. The faint, translucent forms of Luke Skywalker and Ezra Bridger resolved into being. They stood in the cockpit of their small freighter, the telltale streaking blue light of hyperspace visible through the canopy behind them. The transmission was clean, but a faint hum of powerful engines vibrated through the speakers, a constant reminder of their distance and speed. In the background of the hologram, a quieter drama played out. The child Grogu was seated in the co-pilot's chair, his large, expressive eyes narrowed in concentration. One of his three-fingered hands was raised, and hovering unsteadily a few inches off the deck was the astromech droid R2-D2. R2 let out a series of indignant, wobbling whistles and beeps, his dome swiveling as he was gently lifted, then lowered, then lifted again in a shaky, repetitive cycle. Neither Luke nor Ezra seemed to notice, their attention fixed on the transmission. Leia did not waste time with pleasantries. "You said you saw something in the Force." "What kind of something?" Luke's gaze was steady, but the lines around his eyes seemed deeper, etched by a weariness that was more than physical. "A machine," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "An ancient factory, building fleets in the dark. We don't know who made it, or if it's even alive in any way we can understand. Its presence in the Force is a void." Ezra shifted his weight, his own face grim. "It feeds on something, but not the Force, not raw energy. It's more specific than that. It feeds on life, on people. We felt it, a cold, draining sensation." Leia's expression hardened, her diplomatic mask solidifying into something flinty and sharp. She exchanged a swift, knowing glance with Han. The playful cynicism had vanished from his face, replaced by a soldier's grim focus. There were residual reports from the Dathomir sector, Leia said, her voice clipped. Strange energy signatures we couldn't classify. High Command wrote it off as exotic particle fallout from leftover Imperial tech. This isn't Imperial, Luke stated with absolute certainty. The technology, if that's even the right word for it, feels older, more purposeful. It has a consciousness, a hunger, and Thrawn is connected to it. Somehow he's found a way to wield it. Han pushed off the console, stepping into the periphery of the hologram's glow. Of course he is. That blue bastard always has a plan. Probably had this one cooking since he was doing map reading in the unknown regions. Luke's holographic eyes seemed to look through Han into a darker horizon. This isn't just another Imperial remnant, Han. This is something different. It feels bigger than him. It might be the reason for all of this. It might be what he's preparing for. Leia's brow furrowed. Preparing for? The skepticism in her tone was tempered by a deep, ingrained trust in her brother's instincts. Something is coming, Luke said, his voice dropping, forcing them to listen carefully. The Force doesn't show us why or what it is, only that it's vast, immeasurably vast, and it moves in a silence that swallows worlds. A heavy quiet fell over the war room. The distant Senate chatter sounded suddenly absurd, a pathetic noise against the scale of the threat Luke described. Han broke the silence, his voice low, half joking but with a serious, desperate edge. So if the Republic won't listen, if they're too busy counting credits to see the storm coming, maybe we don't tell them. Maybe we build our own fleet. Something we can control. Luke's gaze snapped to Han, his calm demeanor sharpening into a pointed intensity. Whatever this thing is, Han, it feeds on control. It is the ultimate expression of order imposed by a single consuming will. Don't let our fear of it make us create a pale imitation. That path only leads to one destination. Leia absorbed her brother's words, feeling the subtle warning settle in her gut. He was right. The Senate would debate. They would stall. They would demand incontrovertible proof while the galaxy burned. She had seen this play before. Her shoulders straightened, the Princess of Alderaan receding, replaced by the General of the Rebellion. Then, "We do what we've always done," Leia said, her voice firm and decisive, cutting through the uncertainty. "We act before anyone else will. We prepare while they are still talking." A slow, familiar smirk spread across Han's face. The old rogue was back, seeing a path through the impossible. Sounds like a Lando job to me. A faint, weary smile touched Luke's lips. He'll help. He always does. "And you two?" Leia asked, her eyes shifting between the two Jedi. "We're following the disturbance," Luke replied. "Wherever the Force leads, it's the only map we have." Han raised a skeptical eyebrow, his arms crossing again. "You don't even know where that is, do you? You're just jumping at ghosts?" Luke's smile softened, but his eyes held an unshakable certainty. "Not yet, but we will." Leia nodded, a complex mix of pride and profound worry tightening her chest. She saw the man he had become, a guide trusting a light only he could see. "Then may the Force be with you," she said, the old blessing feeling more like a necessity than a sentiment. "And with all of us, before this becomes something we can't stop." The hologram of the two Jedi flickered and dissolved, the blue light retreating and leaving the war room feeling dimmer, more isolated. The hum of hyperspace was replaced by the more mundane sounds of the ship and the resumption of the Senate broadcast. Han let out a long, slow exhale, shaking his head. "Wherever the Force leads," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "He's gotten more cryptic with age. I'll give him that." Leia turned from the now empty holotable and gave him a small, knowing smile. It was a smile that held years of shared history, of seeing the impossible made possible. "No, Han," she said softly, her gaze drifting past him to the star-filled viewport. to the peaceful, deceptive glow of Chandrila below. Just more certain. She looked out at the countless stars, each one a potential harbor for the coming storm, and they gleamed back at her, cold and silent, like a billion unheeded warnings. The planet Ganthel was a testament to the marriage of industry and audacity. From orbit, it was a world of stark contrasts, vast plains of red soil broken by jagged mountains of volcanic black glass. The horizon perpetually burned with the deep orange glow of massive mining furnaces and refineries, their smoke staining the sky in long gray plumes. Rising from this industrial heartland were the towering gantries and orbital docks of shipyards, their skeletal forms silhouetted against the fiery glow. Amidst the grit and grime, lavish sky domes shimmered with reflected gold light, housing the executives and engineers who commanded this empire of sweat and steel. At the center of it all, both physically and symbolically, stood the sprawling complex of Calrissian Enterprises, a monument to its owner's unique fusion of elegance, wealth, and calculated danger. The Millennium Falcon descended through the hazy atmosphere, its worn hull looking distinctly out of place amidst the pristine corporate shuttles. It settled onto a private landing platform with a final hiss of hydraulic struts and venting exhaust. The ramp lowered, and Han and Leia stepped out into the Ganthel air. A dry, biting wind whipped across the platform, carrying the sharp tang of ozone and the underlying scent of molten metal. Waiting for them at the base of the ramp, as if he had simply materialized there, was Lando Calrissian. Time had refined him, sanding away some of the flash, but none of the style. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored coat of deep blue, lined with subtle gold trim that caught the industrial light. His smile was effortless, a practiced expression that still managed to convey genuine warmth, especially for them. Han Solo, Lando said, his voice a smooth baritone. Still flying that antique? Han descended the ramp, a wry grin spreading across his face. He clasped Lando's offered hand in a firm grip, the gesture a history of rivalry, friendship, and shared survival. It's not the years, it's the mileage, Lando. Something you wouldn't know about, running a planet from a fancy office. Leia followed, her posture regal even in practical travel clothes. Thank you for meeting us on such short notice. For you, Your Highness? Always, Lando replied, his tone softening when he addressed her. Though next time, a holo call would have saved me. A pretty significant fuel invoice. The Kessel Run doesn't pay for itself, you know. Han's grin faded, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the landing platform with a smuggler's instinct. We needed to make sure we weren't being listened to. This isn't a social call. Lando's own charming smile slowly dissolved, replaced by a look of sharp, intelligent curiosity. He gave a slow, understanding nod. Sounds like my kind of meeting. This way. He led them from the open platform into the breathtaking expanse of his executive suite. The room was a study in opulence, with rich fabrics and polished rare woods, but its true centerpiece was the panoramic transparasteel window that formed an entire wall. It offered a staggering view of the Ganthel skyline, a forest of construction, towers and refineries where hundreds of workers, tiny as insects, moved across scaffolds. Freighters glided in steady, silent patterns between the towers, carrying raw ore and, more tellingly, the skeletal husks of salvaged Imperial Star Destroyers being fed into the yards for rebirth. Lando moved to a polished serving droid and poured 3 glasses of Wyron's Reserve, the rich amber liquid catching the light. He handed one to Han and offered another to Leia, who accepted it with a nod. So, Lando began, leaning against his desk and sipping his drink. What brings royalty and rebellion to my doorstep? And don't tell me you just happened to be in the sector. Leia set her glass down and placed a small, discreet holoprojector on the table between them. With a press of a button, a flickering image bloomed into life above the polished surface. It was the vision Luke had shared, ghostly, predatory ships forming in silent, endless ranks around a colossal burning ring that fed on a dying star. Lando watched in silence, his charming facade completely gone, replaced by the keen, calculating gaze of a general who had seen too much. He set his own glass down, the click of crystal on wood sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Someone's building fleets," Lando stated, his voice flat. "And I'm guessing the New Republic Senate is too busy arguing over trade taxes and diplomatic niceties to notice the funeral pyre being prepared." "We need a fleet, Lando," Leia said, her voice low and intense. "One that can move faster than the Senate can vote. One that operates outside their bureaucracy and their blindness." Han stepped forward, his expression uncharacteristically grave. "We're not talking about building another official army. We don't want to challenge the Republic. We just need a safety net, a fleet built by people we can trust, for when their defenses inevitably fail." Lando studied the haunting hologram for a long, heavy moment. His eyes traced the lines of the alien ships, the terrifying scale of the construct. He then turned away from the image and looked out his vast window. Beyond the pristine glass, the real work of his enterprise continued. Sparks from welding. Crews rained down like a shower of orange stars against the dark hull of a half-dismantled Imperial-class Star Destroyer. He saw the faces of his workers out there, a motley crew of ex-Imperials seeking redemption, bounty hunters looking for a steady credit, and smugglers who owed him favors. They were his people. Unconventional, unreliable by military standards, but fiercely loyal to the man who gave them a second chance. "If Thrawn's back," Lando said, still looking out at his shipyards, "he'll be watching the Republic. He'll have spies in their military, their intelligence, their Senate. He'll anticipate their every move." He finally turned back to face them. His decision made. "He won't be watching me. He'll see a businessman, a hustler, a has-been general playing with toys. That's our advantage." He walked back to the table and deactivated the holoprojector, the terrifying image vanishing. "I'll help you. Quietly. We'll use my resources, my contacts, my yards. We'll build your safety net right here under his nose." He fixed them both with a look that was deadly serious. "But if this goes wrong, if this blows up in our faces, it never happened. You never came here. This fleet is a rogue operation, a pirate armada, and I'm just a greedy fool who got in over his head. Understood?" Leia met his gaze without flinching, her own resolve a mirror of his. "If this goes wrong, Lando, there won't be anyone left to blame." Lando held her look for a beat longer, then gave a single, resolute nod. "Then let's get to work." The Calrissian initiative began not with a declaration, but with a whisper. In the deepest, most secure docks of Ganthel, the work commenced. Rows of derelict Star Destroyers, once the iron fist of the Empire, were towed into place. Their dark, oppressive hulls were swarmed by teams of engineers and droids who began the painstaking process of stripping them down. Imperial insignias were scorched away with plasma torches. Outdated targeting systems were ripped out and replaced with modern, non-standard components. The ships were not being restored to their former glory. They were being reborn, reforged into something new, something that belonged to no government, but to the desperate hope of a few. On the training grounds, former bounty hunters in Skard, armor drilled alongside ex-Imperial officers who had traded their crisp uniforms for practical flight suits. The discipline of the Imperial Academy clashed with the chaotic, individualistic styles of the smugglers, but a new hybrid form of combat was emerging. It was built on adaptability and a shared, unspoken understanding that they were the last line of defense, the plan no one else knew about. Leia was a constant presence, her small, determined figure moving through the bustling hangars and command centers. She oversaw flight tests, her sharp eyes missing nothing, her voice calm but firm as she suggested adjustments and coordinated the chaotic flow of personnel and parts. She was the soul of the operation, the unwavering belief that made the impossible seem attainable. and Lando stood on observation decks, watching his creation grow. He would see the newly christened frigates, their hulls bearing the elegant, stylized logo of his enterprise instead of a military designation, and a flicker of immense pride would cross his face. It was always followed by a shadow of profound worry, the heavy knowledge of what they were preparing to face, and the terrifying cost of failure. He was betting his fortune, his reputation, and his life on a feeling, on the word of a Jedi, and the desperation of his friends. The Calrissian Initiative was born in that shadow, a fleet built not on regulations and treaties, but on trust, redemption, and the last defiant light of hope in a galaxy once again sliding into darkness. The planet was a wound in the fabric of wild space, a sphere of perpetual fury. From orbit, it was a maelstrom of bruised purple and black, its surface torn by continuous lightning strikes that illuminated churning clouds of dust and ash. There were no oceans, no signs of life, only a relentless, screaming storm that scoured the jagged landscape below. Luke's ship, the Chance Gambit, bucked and shuddered as it pierced the upper atmosphere, its engines whining in protest against the violent turbulence. The cockpit was filled with the roar of the gale and the sharp crackle of static from the overwhelmed sensors. Ezra Bridger gripped his console, his knuckles white. "You sure this is where the Force wants us? This feels less like a destination and more like a digestive system." Luke's hands were steady on the controls, his gaze fixed on the chaotic vista ahead. "The Force doesn't always lead us to comfort, Ezra, only to truth, and truth is rarely found in peaceful places." He guided the ship down through a narrow canyon, its walls sheer obsidian that gleamed wetly in the frequent lightning flashes. They settled on a precarious ledge amid a forest of jagged rock spires that clawed at the angry sky. The moment the engines powered down, the sound of the storm became all-consuming, a deafening roar of wind and a continuous, ground-shaking percussion of thunder that felt like the breath of some slumbering planetary leviathan. They disembarked, pulling their cloaks tight against the stinging, ash-laden wind. Before them, carved directly into the cliff face, was the entrance to a temple. It was not a structure of grace or beauty, but a brutalist moor of geometric, half-organic stone, as if the mountain itself had grown a blasphemous mouth. The entrance gaped wide, filled with shifting shadows and sand that glowed with a faint, sickly green luminescence. The architecture was unmistakable, a style Luke had only seen in the oldest and most forbidden texts. It was Rakatan. The air at the threshold hummed with a palpable, unseen energy, a psychic residue that raised the hairs on their arms. "This place feels alive," Ezra said, his voice barely a whisper against the storm's cacophony. "Not alive," Luke corrected, his senses reaching out, probing the ancient stone. "Remembering. It is a place of echoes. The stones here have witnessed things they cannot forget." They stepped inside, and the sound of the storm diminished, replaced by an eerie, pressurized silence. Lightning flashed outside, casting their long, distorted silhouettes against the walls of a vast, circular hall. Broken pillars rose around, them like the petrified ribs of a colossal beast, straining toward a cracked and open ceiling through which the storm still raged. The walls were covered in intricate murals, carved with a skill that spoke of a long-vanished civilization. The images were horrifying in their clarity, stars being devoured by great rings of fire, armadas of strange ships darkening skies, and countless civilizations kneeling in submission before monolithic, unsympathetic machines. Luke moved forward, his booted feet making no sound on the dusty floor. He reached out and brushed his gloved fingers along a carving of a Rakatan figure, overseeing a forge of stars. The stone vibrated faintly beneath his touch, and the carved lines began to pulse with a soft, internal light. "Whoever built this," Luke murmured, "they didn't just build for power. They tried to make something eternal, to stamp their will upon the galaxy itself." A low hum began to fill the chamber, emanating from the walls themselves. The murals began to move. The static carvings dissolved into flowing, glowing lines that twisted and reformed into living, terrifying images. They saw worlds engulfed in fire, cities crumbling into dust. They saw the machines rising, not as tools, but as masters. They felt the psychic screams of billions as their suns were extinguished, their life force funneled into the ravenous maw of the Starforge. Ezra staggered back, gripping his head. It's too much. It's everywhere. I can feel them dying. Stay calm. Luke's voice was an anchor in the psychic storm. Do not let the memory consume you. Let it flow through you, not into you. Observe. Understand. The glow intensified, the visions becoming a dizzying, overwhelming torrent of galactic genocide. And then, a flash of violent red cut through the historical nightmare. It was not a memory. It was real. A red lightsaber blade spun through the darkness of the chamber, like a thrown vibroblade shrieking as it hurtled directly toward Luke's head. He reacted not with thought, but with instinct, his own green blade snapping to life and meeting the red attack in a shower of white-hot sparks. The force of the impact reverberated up his arm. The red blade rebounded as if on a wire, whirling, back through the air into the waiting hand of a figure who emerged from the deeper shadows. Mara Jade stepped forward, her dark cloak snapping around her despite the still air. Her red lightsaber cast a hellish glow, illuminating a face of sharp, elegant angles and eyes that burned with a cold, focused resolve. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the blades and the fading echoes of the vision. Luke lowered his saber slightly, the green light illuminating his calm, composed expression. "Neither do you," he replied. "But maybe that's why we're both here. The Force works in ways we cannot always foresee." Ezra ignited his blue lightsaber, stepping forward to flank Luke, his stance defensive. "She's with Thrawn. This is a trap." "Then the Force brought her here for a reason," Luke said, his eyes never leaving Mara. "There are no accidents." Mara did not hesitate. She lunged forward, a blur of motion, her red blade screaming toward Luke in a diagonal slash. He defended it easily, the movement precise. He did not counterattack. He simply shifted his stance, using her momentum to redirect her force harmlessly past him. "Defend. Don't attack," Luke instructed Ezra, his voice firm but calm. Ezra moved in sync with Luke, his blue blade meeting Mara's next flurry of strikes. Sparks flew across the ancient chamber floor as their weapons clashed. She was relentless, her style a brutal, efficient amalgamation of imperial military training and something wilder, more personal. "She's fast," Ezra grunted, blocking a thrust, aimed at his chest. "She's angry," Luke corrected, his movements a fluid dance of defense. "There is a difference. Speed is a tool, anger is a master." Mara pivoted with acrobatic grace, feinting toward Luke before striking high at Ezra's exposed side. Luke was there in an instant, his green blade intercepting hers with a single powerful arc that pushed her back a step. "You think mercy wins?" "Wars!" Mara spat, her voice tight with contempt. "No," Luke answered, his gaze steady. "But it ends them. Victory without mercy is just the prelude to the next war." As if in response to their conflict, a tremendous fork of lightning ripped through, the broken ceiling striking the far wall. The brief, blinding illumination threw their faces into sharp relief of light and shadow. The murals behind them shimmered and changed again, now showing the Rakata turning their own terrible weapons upon each other, their empire consumed from within by paranoia, fear, and the very control they had sought to impose. The ground beneath, their feet began to tremble, a deep groaning from the planet's core. Mara pressed her attack, channeling her frustration into a furious assault that drove Luke back toward the center of the chamber. He parried each strike, his calm a stark contrast to her fury, his focus on protecting rather than harming. Then, with a thunderous crack that drowned out the storm, a large section of the chamber floor directly beneath Mara gave way. The stone slab crumbled into a dark abyss. Mara's eyes widened in shock as she lost her footing, her lightsaber flying from her grasp and tumbling into the void. Without a moment's hesitation, Luke surged forward, dropping his own saber and reaching out to catch her wrist as she fell. He anchored himself, his muscles straining as he held her suspended over the seemingly bottomless pit. Dust and debris rained down around them, and the storm howled through the broken roof. For a long second, she just hung there, staring up at him in stunned disbelief. "You should have let me fall," she whispered, the words barely audible. "You're not my enemy," Luke said, his voice firm. He pulled her up, her weight coming easily as she found purchase on the stable ledge. For a moment, they were close, breathing heavily, close enough to see past the warrior facades. He saw the confusion and conflict in her eyes. She saw the unwavering compassion in his. She stared at him, her hardened mask fractured. "Then you don't know what I am." She stepped back, and with a flick of her wrist, her red lightsaber flew from the darkness below and smacked into her palm. She did not ignite it. Her voice was quieter now, stripped of its venom. "Stay away from me, Jedi." Ezra takes a step back, realizing that this isn't a battle for him. Luke stood his ground, making no move to retrieve his own weapon. "You don't have to keep fighting his war. Whatever Thrawn told you, whatever purpose he gave you, it isn't who you are. It's a role you were forced to play." Mara ignited her saber. Again, the red light blazing. But now it illuminated the unshed tears glistening in her eyes, tears of rage and a pain so deep it had become part of her skeleton. "You don't know me. You have no idea what he made me, what I was trained to be." Wow, swung again, but the attacks were different now. Faster, more desperate, less precise. They were the strikes of someone trying to drown out a voice inside their own head. Luke met each blow, his green blade a serene barrier against her storm. He did not strike back. He simply stood, a rock against her tide. "Then show me," Luke said, his voice an urgent plea amidst the clashing energy. "Show me you can choose for yourself. Make one choice that is yours and yours alone." Their sabers locked, the red and green blades sizzling against each other, casting a mixed fiery light across their faces. They were inches apart. He could see the war raging within her, the lifetime of conditioning battling against a newfound, terrifying spark of doubt. Mara hesitated. The rage in her eyes seemed to drain away, leaving behind a vast and lonely emptiness. The fire in her blade flickered. With a sharp, almost pained motion, she disengaged and shut the blade off, stepping back into the shadows. "You're making a mistake, Skywalker," she said, her back to him. "I made one once," Luke replied softly, picking up his lightsaber. "I thought my father was beyond saving. I will not make that mistake again." Mara's jaw tightened. She began to walk toward the temple entrance, back into the raging storm. "If I see you again, I won't hesitate." "Neither will I," Luke called after her. "But not for the reason you think." She stopped briefly at the threshold, the wind whipping her cloak around her. She did not look back, but something in her posture shifted, a barely perceptible tension that spoke of a calculation being re-evaluated. Then she was gone, vanished into the curtain of ash and lightning. Ezra let out a long, slow exhale, deactivating his blue blade. The silence in the chamber felt heavier than before. "You think she'll tell Thrawn?" "Maybe," Luke said, his gaze still fixed on the empty entrance. "But I don't think she knows what to tell him anymore. The truth is a difficult thing to report." He turned back to the murals, which had faded back to static carvings. The final image of the Rakata destroying themselves was stark and clear. "This place remembers what happens when power forgets mercy," Luke murmured, "when control becomes the only god worth worshipping." A final flash of lightning from outside illuminated the chamber, and for a fleeting instant, the reflection of a great burning ring was caught in the polished surface of Luke's green lightsaber blade. Then, silence. The strategy chamber aboard the Imperial Star Destroyer Chimera was a sanctum of cold calculation, its silence broken only by the low, pervasive hum of the ship's vital systems. Outside the massive viewport, the Thaler expanse churned in a perpetual violent ballet. Waves of crimson and violet nebula gas rolled through the void, their luminous plasma illuminating the Chimera's gray hull like veins beneath skin. Suspended in this chaotic haze were the fruits of their labor, rows of newly forged vessels from the Starforge. They were sleek, black, and monstrous, their surfaces faintly rippling with an unsettling organic pulse, as if the ships themselves were breathing. Captain Gilad Pellaeon stood before Grand Admiral Thrawn, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, a picture of military formality. "Grand Admiral," he began, his voice cutting cleanly through the silence. "Agent Jade made contact with the Jedi as anticipated. She failed to eliminate them. However, she successfully placed a tracking beacon on their vessel before breaking. Engagement. A hologram flickered to life between them, displaying a tactical schematic. It showed the distinct energy signature of Luke Skywalker's freighter, the Chance Gambit, as it made the jump to hyperspace, its vector leading deeper into the uncharted regions of wild space. Pellaeon continued. "They are moving further into wild space, following a trajectory consistent with a force-based navigation. They are not using standard charts." Thrawn did not turn from his contemplation of the fleet. "Good, let them follow their faith. The Force reveals what it must, when it must. It guides them, but it also makes them predictable. Even to them, it is a leash. We now hold the other end." He finally turned from the viewport. The reflected light from the nebula danced across his sharp features, painting his red eyes with a hellish glow. "And the test fleet? Fully operational," Pellaeon reported. "Neural synchronization across all vessels is stable. The Great Mothers await your command to begin the next phase." As if summoned by the mention of their purpose, a tremor of sound filled the chamber, a dissonant chord that was felt more than heard. The temperature dropped several degrees, frosting the edges of the viewport. From the mist that gathered in the corner of the room, the three Great Mothers coalesced. Their withered forms seemed to draw the light from the room, their eyes burning with a cold green fire. Their voices overlapped, a low chant that seemed to be carried not through air, but through the very metal of the ship's corridors. "It feeds well, Grand Admiral," their voices hissed in unison. "But hunger never ends. The appetite only grows." Thrawn studied the fleet beyond the transparastile, a commander observing his new army. The ships were bound together by invisible strings of pulsating energy, a psychic web woven by the Great Mothers and channeled through the Starforge. "Then let it feed," Thrawn stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Control does not come from starvation. It begins with acknowledging the appetite, with directing it." Suddenly, on the tactical display and visible through the viewport, one of the smaller scouting vessels drifted out of its perfect formation. Its running lights flickered erratically, and its movements became twitchy, uncoordinated, like a muscle spasm. It listed to port, its trajectory becoming a slow, uncontrolled drift. Pellaeon leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Vessel 12 has broken pattern. The control link is unstable. It is not responding to the collective directive." Thrawn watched the aberrant ship, his eyes narrowing in quiet fascination. He did not reach for a control, did not issue a command. "Leave it," Thrawn said. Pellaeon looked from the viewport back to his admiral, confusion and concern warring on his face. "Sir, with all due respect, if the Forge's neural link fails and one of these vessels goes fully rogue, the consequences could be—" "It is not failure, Captain," Thrawn interrupted, his tone that of a professor correcting a promising student. "It is evolution. A flaw in the system is an opportunity for the system to improve. A perfect design must be tested. It must be allowed to test itself. As they watched, the rogue ship's engines flared to life, burning with a sudden, violent intensity. It turned sharply, ignoring the silent, pulsing formation of its brethren, and began to drift purposefully toward the densest, most turbulent region of the nebula, where sensor readings dissolved into meaningless static. The Great Mothers let out a low, collective hiss. "You play with a hunger that remembers its first masters," they whispered, their green eyes fixed on the departing vessel. The Rakata understood such power. It consumed them. "Then it will learn to obey new ones," Thrawn replied, his gaze still locked on the vanishing ship. "Ones who understand that power is a tool, not a master." The signal from Vessel 12 faded from the tactical display, swallowed by the nebula's interference. A heavy silence descended upon the chamber, broken only by the ever-present hum. Pelion finally broke the quiet, his voice hesitant. "Should I mark it as destroyed, Admiral?" Thrawn's reflection in the viewport stared back at him, a pale mask, superimposed over the stellar storm. "No," he said, the word final. "Mark it as independent. We will see what it becomes. Every ecosystem needs its predators. Every system needs a variable it cannot control." He stepped closer to the viewport, his tone calm and analytical, but the faintest, most chilling smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Necessity is born from rebellion, Captain. A forced hand is a weak one, but a will that chooses to align with your own, that is true power. Even a mindless hunger can be taught purpose." The Great Mothers began to fade, their physical forms dissolving back into mist. Their final whisper echoed through the chamber, a promise and a warning that lingered in the suddenly warmer air. "It learns." Outside, the remaining ships of the fleet continued to pulse in eerie, perfect unison, their collective glow bleeding into the red mist of the expanse, a single, monstrous entity awaiting its next command. Thrawn stood for a long moment, watching his creation. "Prepare the next sequence," he said, his voice soft yet absolute. "Let the forge learn. Let it grow." The camera lingered on Thrawn's reflection in the viewport, the fiery red of the nebula flickering like living flame across his composed features, illuminating the profound, terrifying intellect behind his eyes. "Perfection requires defiance," he said, the words a quiet personal creed spoken to the void. The world was a bleached skull, its atmosphere a thin veil over shattered rock and dust. The ruins were low, geometric structures half buried in the dunes, their surfaces etched with the same angular script they had encountered before. As Luke and Ezra stepped into the gloom of a collapsed corridor, the very air hummed with a low vibration, as if the planet itself was trapped in a troubled dream. Their lightsabers ignited, casting green and blue pools of light in the oppressive darkness. Dust motes, stirred by their passage, swirled like tiny doomed stars. "Every one of these worlds," Ezra said, his voice hushed. "The same story. Stars devoured, systems hollowed out. It's a graveyard with the same epitaph." "They were building something," Luke replied, his gaze on carvings of figures directing immense energies. "Not for conquest, I think. For survival. The question is what they were so desperate to survive." Ezra crouched, brushing grime from a cracked mural. It depicted a colossal structure, a central sphere with 3 vast fins drawing fire from a star. "This is the thing from the vision. But what is it?" "R2, scan this," Luke instructed. The astromech droid rolled forward, his dome light piercing the gloom. A blue scanning light washed over the mural. R2-D2 beeped and whistled, processing, his holographic projector flickering with fragmented data streams and corrupted star charts. After a moment, a clear schematic resolved, labeled in archaic basic, Starforge. A fragmented description followed. Rakata Infinite Empire. Planetary construction facility. Feeds on stellar matter. The Starforge. Ezra stared. The Rakata? I've never heard of them. They're a myth, Luke said, his voice low with realization. A precursor civilization. If this is real, Thrawn hasn't just found a weapon. He's found a relic of a power that once ruled the galaxy. He looked from the hologram back to the mural, a chill settling in his heart. This is a warning. They feared what they had made. The air around them rippled with a sudden, psychic pressure. A whisper moved through the Force, thin and dry as ancient parchment. It remembers its makers. It remembers hunger. Ezra looked sharply at Luke. You heard that? Yes, Luke said, his senses stretching into the darkness. And it's not a memory, it's getting closer. Their lightsabers flickered. R2-D2 chirped in alarm, his lights dimming. Dust trembled from the ceiling. Then stillness returned, deeper and more menacing than before. Luke looked upward, a profound unease coiling within him. On Ganthel, the Calrissian initiative was a hive of frantic activity. The air, thick with the tang of ozone and molten metal, thrummed with the roar of machinery and the sharp hiss of welding torches. Sparks cascaded like orange rain across hangar decks where the skeletons of ships were being reborn against a backdrop of crimson soil and black glass mountains. Han Solo walked alongside Lando Calrissian, inspecting a row of retrofitted Imperial frigates. You sure these things will hold together? Han asked, knocking his knuckles against a strut. Han, please, Lando said, his voice full of a proprietor's pride. This is Ganthel. We specialize in making the impossible not just possible, but profitable. They've been stripped, reinforced, and fitted with the best systems credits can quietly buy. They're better than new. Leia joined them, a datapad in her hand, her expression troubled. The problem isn't the structure, it's the supply chain. Convoy 7 is missing half their hyperdrive couplers. Again. That's the third critical delay this week. Lando's charming smile faded, replaced by a businessman's sharp concern. You think Thrawn's already sniffing around, hitting our supply lines? Not directly, Leia said, her voice low. There's no sign of attack. It's subtler, like someone is feeding him breadcrumbs, misdirected shipments, misplaced orders, logistical nightmares that feel just a little too convenient. As she spoke, in the echoing shadows of the Coruscant Senate, a sleek, nondescript protocol droid accessed a maintenance terminal. Its photoreceptor flickered from blue to a sharp red for a fraction of a second as it transferred an encrypted data packet. On the screen, the words, Project, Calrissian Initiative, flashed alongside blueprints and fleet routes before a hidden icon pulsed. Imperial Remnant, encryption, accepted. Back on Ganthel, Leia stared as another convoy vanished from her datapad's logs. Our manifests are being altered mid-transmission. The data is being scrubbed from Republic servers. Whoever's behind this has high-level Senate security clearance. Han's face darkened. You're saying we've got a mole? Someone inside the New Republic itself? Worse, Leia countered, her voice grim. A plant, a sleeper, someone, or more likely, something that has been buried deep inside Republic intelligence from the very beginning. Lando sighed, running a hand over his face as he looked out at the half-built fleet, the fruits of his fortune and risk. Building ships faster than the Senate can vote won't matter a damn if Thrawn knows where every bolt is going and when every ship is launching. He'll be waiting for us. Leia followed his gaze, the reflection of the skeletal starships mirrored in her determined eyes. Then we go dark. As of now, no more electronic transmissions. No more Senate oversight or requisitions. We build this fleet by hand, off the grid. We use couriers we trust, coded phrases, and hidden stockpiles. Han nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. So, the old-fashioned way. Exactly, Leia said, her posture straightening with the ghost of the rebellion's resolve. The way we did it when we had nothing. The way we know works. Aboard the Chimera, floating in the heart of the Thalor expanse, Grand Admiral Thrawn stood before a vast tactical display. On one side, holograms of New Republic fleet movements and supply convoys shifted. On the other, A map of Force resonances glowed, charting the Jedi's path. Threads of light connected the two. Captain Pelion approached. The infiltration droid reports another successful data transfer. The Republic remains completely unaware of its presence. As expected, Thrawn, said, his voice calm. A system built on the principle of transparency is the easiest to blind. They believe their openness is a strength. It is their greatest vulnerability. The air grew cold. The three great mothers appeared as faint, shimmering outlines behind him, their whispers like the sound of wind whistling through a Durasteel canyon. The Jedi walk the paths of the dead, seeking answers in dust, they hissed. The woman builds fleets of ghosts, thinking to shield her people. You feed both ends of the same blade, Grand Admiral. You stoke the fear that drives them. Thrawn did, not turn to face them. Balance, great mothers, is an illusion told to children. There is no equilibrium in nature, only temporary states of dominance. What you call balance, I call orchestration. I am not a participant in their struggle. I am the composer of its finale. He turned toward the main viewport, where the first completed, fully living ships of his new fleet drifted in perfect, silent formation, their hulls pulsing with a faint, internal light. The Republic and the Jedi follow instinct. They react. They hope. They trust in a power they cannot control. Thrawn said, his voice calm and absolute. I follow pattern. I study. I predict. I impose order. Instinct is fleeting. It dies with the individual. But pattern survives. It is eternal. The camera panned over Thrawn's reflection in the transparent steel, his sharp, intelligent features superimposed over the terrifying, pulsating armada behind him, a master composer fine-tuning the instruments for the devastating crescendo to come. The silence of the dead world was a physical weight, broken only by the soft hum of lightsabers and the anxious whir of R2-D2's servos. Luke and Ezra knelt, their hands pressed to the cold stone floor. Faint, ghostly lines of Rakatan script began to glow beneath their fingertips, a psychic residue awakening to their presence. The translation formed not in their ears, but directly in their minds, a chilling, singular thought. The star that feeds. A galaxy away, in the deepest, most secure hangar on Ganthel, the work continued in near total darkness. The only illumination came from the cold blue glow of emergency work lights, casting long, dancing shadows. Here, in this sanctum of silence, Leia and Lando huddled over a single portable star chart, their voices hushed. They coordinated the movement of parts with hand signals and coded phrases passed to trusted runners, building their fleet one whispered command at a time, a ghost operation hidden within the belly of a bustling world. On Coruscant, amidst the Kaisan, towering, empty archives of the Senate, the infiltration droid moved with silent, mechanical purpose. Its polished feet made no sound on the polished floors. Its photoreceptor glowed a steady, benign blue as it scanned terabyte after terabyte of data. It absorbed fleet deployments, resource allocations, and the private correspondence of senators. It was a ghost in the machine, harvesting secrets in plain sight, completely undetected. And aboard the Chimera, Thrawn stood motionless before his grand tapestry of war. His crimson eyes moved with methodical precision between the two holographic fronts. On his left, the hard, practical light of Republic logistics and fleet movements. On his right, the ethereal, swirling map of Force resonance, a spiritual signature tracing the path of the Jedi. His hands, clasped behind his back, twitched almost imperceptibly, as if gently adjusting the tension on invisible strings. He was the composer, and the galaxy was his symphony. Each movement was a note in the devastating crescendo he was preparing to conduct. The Jedi's search, the Republic's desperation, his own relentless advance, all of it was part of the music. The blue streak of hyperspace collapsed into the absolute blackness of deep space, a void so empty it felt like a wound in the galaxy. Before them, silhouetted against the faint glow of distant nebulae, hung a graveyard. It was a convoy of new Republic ships, their running lights dead, their hulls dark and silent. There were no scorch marks of turbolaser fire, no expanding clouds of debris from a violent end. They were simply there, suspended in the void, a fleet of ghosts. "It's like they just stopped," Ezra said, his voice quiet in the stunned silence. "Of the cockpit, or were stopped," Luke replied, his hand hovering over the console. His eyes closed, and he reached out into the Force. The echoes that returned to him were faint and ancient, a resonance that felt utterly wrong. There was no lingering pain of death, no final scream of terror. There was only a profound emptiness, a void where life and energy had been. "There's no death here," he murmured, his brow furrowed in concentration. "No peace either, just absence." They exchanged a grim look, a silent understanding passing between them. They pulled on breath, masks, and moved toward the airlock. The ramp of their ship lowered into the hangar bay of the lead cruiser. The moment their boots touched the deck, all sound seemed to die, absorbed by the oppressive stillness. The space was a tomb. Hull panels were warped inward, the metal twisted and melted not by the intense heat of blaster fire, but as if it had been softened and pulled apart by some immense sucking force. Ezra brushed his gloved fingers along a bulkhead. "How long's this thing been adrift?" "Not long enough for it to cool," Luke answered, his voice muffled by his mask. The metal was warm to the touch. They moved deeper, their lightsabers providing the only illumination. The green and blue blades cast long, dancing shadows down corridors, where the walls were stained with strange, ashen handprints, as if the crew had dissolved where they stood. On the bridge, they found nothing. The command chairs were empty. Consoles flickered with sporadic, residual energy, casting erratic light. Across abandoned stations, Luke knelt, placing his bare hand flat on the deck, seeking a deeper truth. A whisper answered him, faint and feminine, slithering through the Force like a serpent. "We take what was wasted. We feed the forge of life." Ezra flinched, clutching his temple. "You hear that?" "I do," Luke said, rising slowly. His gaze was cold, his jaw set. "It's them," Ezra breathed. "The same voices from Peridia." Luke's voice was hard. "These ships weren't destroyed. They were taken. They found their way to the data core chamber. A single, heavily damaged service droid sparked to life as they entered. Its chassis cracked, its optic sensors dim. It twitched erratically, a single claw-like arm straining toward a projector. Recording, it glitched, its voice box distorting. "Final transmission, Convoy 719. A flicker of blue static resolved into a grainy image that hung in the air between them. It showed the Star Forge, that massive, burning ring orbiting the dying red star. Molten tendrils of energy spiraled out from its fins, lashing into the convoy. The energy did not shatter the ships. It enveloped them, drawing light and matter into the ravenous maw of the forge. The hologram shuddered, the image distorting into frantic static as the droid convulsed. "It spoke to us," the droid gasped. Then the projection collapsed. The droid powered down, its last spark dying into the silence. Ezra stared at the empty space where the horrific image had been. "It's the same thing from the vision." "No," Luke said, his voice low and certain. "Not the same. This time it's real." He turned toward a viewport, looking out at the star field. For a single, heart-stopping moment, the reflection of the star forge flickered in the transparasteel, a ghostly ring of fire on the horizon. Then it was gone. "It's feeding," Luke said softly. A low tremor hummed through the derelict ship, a vibration that felt like the void itself was exhaling. Ezra turned, his face pale. "We need to get back to the ship. We need to contact Leia and Han, now." The hidden outpost was a study in sterile efficiency, its dim lights reflecting off sleek, dark panels. A low, constant hum filled the command chamber, the sound of powerful systems operating in perfect secrecy. Mara Jade stepped inside, her high hood drawn back to reveal a face of sharp, controlled intensity. Her lightsaber was clipped securely at her belt, a tool of her trade. Grand Admiral Thrawn rose from a central console, his movement fluid and precise. His posture was impeccable, his gaze fixed on her with an analytical coldness that missed nothing. "You returned," he stated, "with the tracker secured as ordered. You demonstrated discipline." He gestured to a frozen hologram that showed Luke Skywalker's ship, the Chance Gambit, making the jump to hyperspace. "But you failed the primary objective. The Jedi is not eliminated." Mara's voice was steady, though a tightness around her eyes betrayed the memory of the encounter. His reflexes are unexpected. He used a defensive posture. He did not strike back. A faint, cold smile touched Thrawn's lips. "Ah, the famous Jedi compassion. You were faced with a paradox, an enemy who refused to be one. Tell me, Mara, does his mercy frighten you?" Her jaw tightened. She met his glowing red gaze without flinching. "Fear is a waste of resources, Grand Admiral. His compassion is his weakness. He should have let me fall. I survived. I served the Empire's needs first." Thrawn took a single, deliberate step closer, his presence subtly probing the space between them. A prudent answer. But understand this, every weakness can be measured. His instinct is to save, to control fate with sentiment. Yours is to survive, to command fate with clarity. Yet for a moment, you shared his error. He gestured toward a new holographic display that charted Luke and Ezra's recent trajectory through wild space. "Look at the pattern. He runs toward danger, not from it. He follows an instinct he calls the Force. I need you to understand his mind, Mara, to anticipate his compassion, not to emulate it." "I will eliminate the hesitation," she vowed. "And yet here you are," Thrawn countered, his voice a soft, relentless probe. "Alive, free in a sense to choose." He paused, letting the weight of the unspoken options hang in the air. "Whether to obey or to redefine your own order, a prudent answer. But understand this. Every path you take, every choice you make, echoes." Mara nodded slowly, absorbing the layered meaning in his words. She turned without another word, her cloak whispering against the deck as she walked toward the exit. As she reached the doorway, his voice followed her, soft yet carrying absolute clarity. "Do not mistake survival for cowardice. Survival is the first step to mastery. I know who shaped you." The memory struck her with the force of a physical blow. A younger Mara Jade, her face a mask of focused determination, knelt in a stark Imperial training chamber on Coruscant. Dark energy flickered along the walls, a manifestation of the power she was being taught to wield. A commanding presence, vast and impersonal, delivered a final, inescapable order that was seared into her psyche. Kill Luke Skywalker. Her hands tightened on the hilt of her ignited red lightsaber. In her young eyes, fear, anger, and a desperate sense of duty collided in a silent, violent storm. The vision pulsed with heat and oppressive shadow, the weight of the Galactic command pressing down on her chest. For a heartbeat, her resolve faltered, a crack in the perfect facade of the weapon. She was meant to be, but the crimson blade stayed lit, a symbol of both her brutal training and the primal instinct to survive that it could never fully extinguish. Mara stepped out of the command chamber into the narrow, dimly lit corridor. She paused, leaning a hand against the cool metal wall, and closed her eyes for a long moment. Thrawn's voice echoed in her mind. "I offer you an evolved purpose. Survival itself." Her own thoughts, soft and conflicted, rose to the surface. "I was built to obey," she whispered to the emptiness. "Trained to kill. Told who to fear, who to hate." She took a slow, steadying breath, the memory of Luke's hand catching her wrist, his refusal to let her fall, playing behind her eyes. "But the Force," she murmured. "The Force whispers something else. Luke gave me a choice." A slight, dangerous smile touched her lips, the expression feeling both alien and right. It was the look of a master tactician recalculating a battlefield. Not his order, she decided, her voice firm now, a new resolve solidifying within her. Not yet. In Lando's command suite on Ganthel, the panoramic view of the crimson-lit void was a stark contrast to the tension gripping the room. Leia, Han, and Lando stood around the holotable, their faces illuminated by the faint blue images of Luke and Ezra. The hum of hyperspace vibrated through the connection, a sound of urgency. "We traced the whispers to a convoy. We are on our way to Ganthel," Luke's hologram said, his voice grim. "They weren't destroyed. They were siphoned." Ezra's image nodded. "The ships were drained of life and matter, not just energy. The great Mothers and the Forge are working together. It is building a fleet." Leia's expression was stone. Han's hand tightened on the edge of the table. "You're saying this blue bastard is making ships out of the Force?" "It feeds on the star to make a living fleet," Luke confirmed. "It is a Rakatan war machine." With a final, grave nod, his hologram faded away. The silence that followed was broken by the shriek of proximity alarms. Through the vast viewport, a wave of ships emerged from hyperspace. They were black, curved, and moved with a silent, terrifying grace. They did not fire turbolasers, they simply advanced. "Initiate red protocol," Leia barked into her comm. "Deploy defensive screen, no new transmissions. This shipyard is on lockdown." Lando turned to Han, his usual charm gone. "We need to get those half-built Star Destroyers under the shielding now. If this thing is after life force, we have hundreds of ex-Imperials and smugglers out there." Han clapped him on the shoulder, a grim determination in his eyes. "Get Chewie to prep the Falcon. I'll run distraction. The Millennium Falcon always makes for a good target." Leia met Han's gaze. "May the Force be with you both." As the hologram died, the command suite erupted into controlled chaos. Lando began barking orders. "All personnel to blast shields. Get those engine cores going. Prepare for battle." Outside, the Falcon shot into the fray, a nimble specter weaving through construction scaffolds. Around it, the Calrissian initiatives armed freighters and refurbished cruisers opened fire, their laser bolts streaking against the blackness. The battle was a chaotic ballet of light and motion. One of the black ships, struck by concentrated fire from a freighter, did not explode in a fiery blast, but burst apart in a shower of molten metallic flesh. Lando watched a tactical display, a grim grin on his face. "We got one. Somebody get down there and scan that jump trajectory. We need a source." The display flashed, calculating the enemy's origin. The grin faded from Lando's face. "Got it. A classified region in the Thaler Expanse." But the victory was short-lived. The remaining black ships moved with an unsettling, hive-minded precision. They ignored the Falcon and the fighting freighters. Instead, they converged on the main shipyard, their focus on two of the largest, half-completed initiative ships. On the ground, hundreds of workers scrambled for cover, their faces turned up to the sky. "What is that?" one shouted. "It's not an Imperial ship." The shadows of the black ships washed over them. The very air grew cold and heavy, thick with a palpable sense of dread. "Get back!" another worker screamed, his voice raw with terror. "It's coming for us!" Above, the black ships began to siphon. A visible wave of energy, a red internal light that looked like the very essence of life, was pulled from the two initiative ships. The massive vessels shuddered, their running lights flickering and dying. They began to drift, their hulls warping inward as if aged millennia in an instant. The attack was quick, silent, and sterile. It left no explosions, no fatalities, only functional, lifeless husks and widespread panic. Having taken what they came for, the remaining black ships immediately retreated, vanishing back toward the Thalor expanse. In the command suite, Leia stared, her voice a hushed whisper of disbelief. "What was that?" Han's voice crackled over the comm, shaken. "I've never seen anything like this before." "They drained the ships," a comm officer shouted. "Sir, auxiliary power is coming online across the fleet. They didn't destroy the cores, just disabled the energy transfer. We're back to minimal power." Leia straightened, the shock on her face hardening into resolve. "Thrawn wanted us to panic," she said, her voice firm. "He showed us his weapon. He calculated we would run with our data." "So what's the counter-calculation, Your Worship?" Han's voice came back. Leia met Lando's gaze. "We don't retreat. We attack. We know where he is. But we cannot beat a living fleet with conventional tactics. We need to plan an attack." Lando pointed to the display showing their recovering, but wounded fleet. "We have the ships and the pilots. We can mobilize a strike force using our remaining cruisers and freighters as planned." "We will," Leia agreed. "But not yet. Luke and Ezra are returning to Ganthel. They saw the Star Forge. We wait for them. We build a strategy using every element we have." Lando gave a slow, determined nod. "A unified strike. I like it. We give them enough time to land and brief us, and then we hit the Thaler expanse with everything we have left." Alone in the cockpit of her starship, Mara Jade was adrift in a sea of blue. The swirling tunnel of hyperspace was usually a comfort, a predictable path between points A and B. Now it felt like a metaphor for her own spiraling thoughts. Her eyes were fixed on a flickering holo display showing a single cryptic symbol, the tracking beacon she had slipped onto Luke Skywalker's vessel. Her thumb rubbed absently across the familiar grip of her red lightsaber, a nervous habit from a lifetime of training. Thrawn's words echoed in her mind, a cold, analytical mantra. "Do not mistake survival for cowardice. Survival is the first step to mastery." But another memory surfaced, warmer and more disquieting. The duel at the temple, Luke's green blade, a barrier of pure defense. He had every opportunity to disarm her, to strike her down, yet he had held back. He saw an opening and took it, but not to kill, she thought, the familiar heat of anger beginning to simmer in her chest. He took it to save, a foolish, sentimental move, a weakness. She pushed the thought down, locking it away. His compassion is a tactical error, a flaw to be exploited. He had spoken to her not as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a person. The memory was an irritant, a grain of sand in the perfect machine of her focus. He fights to show me something I was never allowed to believe was real. A distraction, a lie. She shoved the feeling deeper, burying it under layers of disciplined resolve. The anger was a tool, a fuel. She would not let it be diluted. A high-pitched tone broke the silence. A sensor alert. Luke's ship was about to exit hyperspace. Her hand darted toward the controls, muscle memory screaming at her to jump to a random vector, to report, to obey. But her hand froze. She looked down at the tracker, its signal a tether to the one person who had seen past the weapon she was supposed to be. Then she looked forward, into the swirling, infinite light, debating the entire direction of her life in that single, split second. She left her hand on the controls, but she did not jump. She kept the tracker locked. She let herself be drawn toward their destination. The blue light of hyperspace snapped away, replaced by the star-flecked black of deep space near Ganthel. Luke's ship, the Chance Gambit, hung in the void. Almost immediately, with a silent flash of pseudo-motion, Mara Jade's sleek armed ship dropped out of a blind jump behind them. It maintained a cautious distance, holding position. It did not attack, but it did not flee. Inside the Chance Gambit, Ezra tensed, his eyes on the sensor screen. She's there. She's following us down. Luke, his hands resting on the controls, closed his eyes. He reached out with the force, and there she was, a familiar storm of anger, discipline, and deeply ingrained confusion. But beneath the tempest, he sensed it again. Clearer now, a profound hesitation, a crack in the foundation. He did not push. He did not send a probing thought or a demanding question. He simply opened a subtle, receptive space in the force around him, an intentional, non-threatening void, and waited to see if she would choose to enter. "Let her," Luke said, his eyes still closed. "She has to make her own choice." Mara banked her ship and descended toward the main landing platform, her landing precise and firm. The ramp lowered with a hiss. She stepped out into the recycled air of the hangar bay, her dark armor a stark contrast to the industrial grime of Ganthel. Her hand hovered near the hilt of her lightsaber, but she did not draw it. Luke and Ezra stood waiting for her in the open, making no hostile moves. She walked toward them, her boots echoing on the deck. "I didn't come to fight," she said, her voice tight and guarded, the words feeling foreign and dangerous. "I know," Luke replied, his calm unnerving. She took a breath, the simple acceptance disarming her further. She forced the rising confusion down, compartmentalizing it with brutal efficiency. "I came to tell you. Thrawn is building an abomination." "We know," Luke said again. "A living fleet powered by a Rakatan artifact." Mara's eyes widened a fraction, the surprise breaking through. Her controlled mask. "It's the Starforge. I heard the whispers on his ship. It's an old myth, but it's real. He recovered it from Dathomir." "Leia and Han have the coordinates for his staging area in the Thalor expanse," Ezra added. "They're waiting for us to brief them." As he spoke, the ramp of the Chance Gambit extended fully. R2-D2 whirred down, offering a series of inquisitive beeps. Behind him, Grogu followed, his large eyes fixed on Mara with open, unafraid curiosity. Mara looked from the two Jedi to the astromech and the child. The anger was still there, a hard, cold knot in her stomach, but she pushed it deeper, locking it away in a dark corner of her mind where it could not interfere. Her hand moved from its ready position near her weapon to the hilt itself. With a deliberate click, she unclipped the red lightsaber and let it hang loose at her hip, a gesture of pure, calculated pragmatism. "I know the Expanse," she stated, her voice steady and professional, all emotions sealed away. "I was his hand. I memorized his patrol routes and shield grids. I can get you in, unseen." She met Luke's gaze directly, her own a mask of icy resolve. "But I'm not doing this for the Republic." "Neither are we," Luke said. "We're doing it for survival, and we're going to find a way to contain the Forge, not destroy it. The galaxy can't handle a weapon like that in anyone's hands. A flicker of something new, a purpose that was her own, cold and clean and separate from the buried anger, ignited in Mara's eyes. The trio, now joined by its smallest and most mechanical members, was complete. "Then what's the strategy, Jedi?" she asked. "We need to brief your command. First, we tell them everything," Luke said, turning toward the interior of the complex. "Then we find the flaw in Thrawn's design, the flaw in his necessity. Together, Luke, Ezra, Mara, with R2-D2 rolling alongside and Grogu following calmly, moved quickly toward the command center, a newly forged alliance walking into the heart of the coming storm. The command suite on Ganthel was a stark contrast to the quiet tension of the hangar. Leia, Han, and Lando stood around the central holotable, its surface displaying the enemy jump vectors, all converging on the Thalor expanse. The door hissed, open, and Luke and Ezra entered, followed by Mara Jade. She remained a step behind, a silent, watchful presence in her dark armor that immediately drew everyone's attention. Leia's eyes widened in surprise. Han's hand instinctively drifted toward his blaster, but Lando just raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. Before anyone could speak, Luke said calmly, She's with us. Ezra, walking in just behind Luke, added with a wry, understated tone. Clearly. Lando stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Mara. Well now, he said, his voice smooth as silk. I don't believe we've had the pleasure. Lando Calrissian at, your service. And you are? Mara's gaze was cool and assessing, completely unmoved by his charm. I'm the one who knows how to get you through Thrawn's defenses alive. That's all you need to know, Leia cut in, her tone bringing the focus back to the matter at hand. We can do introductions later. You confirmed it is the Star Forge. Thrawn used its initial attack to gauge our response, not to destroy us. Luke nodded. It was not a military attack. It was a feeding. It siphons the Force energy from the ship systems, and likely the biological energy of the crew. When we were at the temple, Ezra added, the Forge was gathering a living fleet. Now, it has it. A living fleet powered by a star. Mara stepped forward then, ignoring Lando's lingering gaze. She pointed a gloved finger at the holomap, her voice clipped and analytical. I know the Expanse. Thrawn is using the nebula's gravitational field distortions to mask the Forge's energy signature. A conventional attack will be impossible. Your ships are too slow to breach the perimeter before the psychic field disables them. Han crossed his arms, a skeptical look on his face. Great. So we run the fastest ships in the galaxy at it, and they just turn into space junk? Wait, Lando interjected, finally tearing his eyes away from Mara to look at Luke. The field neutralizes power. But your ship, the one you used to find the convoy, it's small, agile. Could it get through? The field is designed to nullify technology powered by conventional energy, Luke explained. Hyperdrives, shields, turbo lasers. But it cannot nullify the living energy of the Force. A focused presence might be able to push through. Leia's eyes lit with the spark of a plan coming together. Then we do not fight fire with fire. We fight power with purpose. We use Landos. Recovered cruisers and the Falcon as the initial distraction. Luke gestured toward Mara. She knows the blind spots. We need to use the distortion fields to our advantage. Mara gave a sharp nod. They will expect you to hit the Forge ring directly. The Forge's energy shield is weakest at the star anchor points, where the molten energy is drawn in. That is our target. Ezra looked between Luke and Mara, a determined set to his jaw.
Mara and I will pilot. We can run the close escort on a small vessel. Luke, you focus on the star anchor.
The combined focus of the three of us might be enough to push through the field. Han shook his head, his expression grim. So we run in, get our power drained, and hope the three of you can punch a hole in an ancient death machine before our ships float off into the void. Leia placed a determined hand flat on the hollow table. It is the only way to attack the source, Han. It is the only element Thrawn did not account for. A unified command and a unified force. Lando looked around the room, his gaze finally settling on Mara with a look of newfound respect mixed with his signature charm. A woman with a plan. I like it. Mara rolls her eyes. Lando again addresses the room. Then let us prep the fleet. We hit the Expanse on a two-pronged attack. Our cruisers for volume, the Falcon for speed, and the Jedi for the spearhead. He met Leia's gaze. We jump in 1 hour. The Thalor Expanse was a churning cauldron of cosmic storms, a shroud of violent nebulae and gravitational distortions. At its heart, the Star Forge hung like a blasphemous idol, its colossal ring and 3 vast fins pulsing with malevolent light, as it fed on the dying red giant star. Around it, the fully activated living fleet drifted in perfect, silent formation. Hundreds of black, curved ships that seemed less like machines and more like a swarm of predatory insects, their hulls absorbing the faint starlight. With a series of flashes, the Calrissian Initiative fleet ripped out of hyperspace in a coordinated attack formation. The Millennium Falcon led the charge, flanked by retrofitted cruisers and freighters. Luke's small ship, carrying him, Ezra, and Mara, positioned itself as the spearhead, Here we go. Han's voice crackled over the comm from the Falcon's cockpit. Target the anchors, Luke. We're running distraction. In the Falcon's dorsal gun turret, Leia spun her chair, hands gripping the controls. Just get us in range, Han, she said, her voice focused and cold. The targeting computer flickered to life before her. The initiative ships immediately opened fire. A strategic barrage of laser fire aimed to draw the living fleet away from the forge. Aboard the Chimera, Thrawn observed the tactical display, a look of focused anticipation on his face. They anticipated our defense, Grand Admiral, Pelion reported, his voice alarmed. They are prioritizing the living fleet. An excellent counter-gambit, Thrawn said calmly. Let us reward their aggression. Order the living fleet to engage with conventional tactics. Test their limits. The battle erupted in a storm of light and violence. The living fleet swarmed the initiative ships with terrifying speed and coordination. The Millennium Falcon weaved and dodged through the maelstrom. Chewie, I need more power to the rear deflectors, Han yelled over the comm. They're all over us. In the turret, Leia was a storm of controlled motion. She tracked a black fighter as it screamed past the viewport, leading it perfectly. She fired. Twin laser bolts lanced out, catching the enemy ship in its wing. It spun away, venting atmosphere. One less, she reported, her voice steady. Nice shot, Princess. Lando's voice came from the engineering station. Don't get distracted, she replied, already acquiring a new target. They're coming in fast. After several tense minutes of battle, Thrawn observed the data stream with satisfaction. They are predictable in their passion. They believe they can win with courage. Time for the truth. He looked to the three Great Mothers who stood waiting. Great Mothers, activate the Forge's primary psychic field. Demonstrate the true meaning of the word power. The Great Mothers began a low, guttural chant, a sound that seemed to scrape against the soul itself. Suddenly, a new, more profound tremor shook the very fabric of space. The red giant star at the center of the system, drained beyond its limit by the Star Forge, began to convulse. Its surface rippled, then collapsed inward with terrifying speed, before erupting outward in a silent, blinding wave of pure energy, a supernova. Incoming shockwave, Han shouted. Brace! Aboard the Chimera, Thrawn watched the stellar death with a faint, chilling smile. Now, he commanded. The Chimera and the entire living fleet were instantly enveloped in a shimmering, multi-layered energy shield, a defense prepared for this exact, cataclysmic moment. The initiative fleet had no such preparation. All power to forward shields, now! Leia heard Han yell over the ship-wide comm. Across the fleet, captains echoed the command. The wave of stellar fury hit them. The Falcon bucked wildly, its shields flaring white-hot. In her turret, Leia was thrown violently against her restraints. Two of the larger initiative cruisers on her scopes, their shields overloading, were vaporized instantly, their hulls turning to incandescent dust. Dozens of smaller support ships simply vanished. When the light finally faded, the remaining initiative ships were battered, their shields flickering at minimal power, floating amidst the expanding cloud of their own dead. Leia stared out at the devastation, her face pale. Han, report! Shields are failing across the board. His voice was shaken. We've lost the Liberty and the Dauntless. At least 30 smaller vessels. They're just gone. In the sudden, grim quiet, the Falcon and Luke's ship, having weathered the storm, found their path clear. The supernova had momentarily scattered the living fleet. They were now within striking distance of the Starforge's vulnerable anchor points. We are in position, Luke's voice came over the comm, steady amidst the carnage. We are moving to engage the primary target. Aboard the Chimera, Thrawn observed the two small, persistent vessels advancing. Their courage is commendable, but their predictability is their undoing. He turned to the three Great Mothers. Now, demonstrate the true meaning of the word, power. The Great Mothers began a new, more intense chant. A different kind of wave pulsed outward from the Star Forge. Not a physical force, but a wave of red, psychic energy. It washed over the attacking fleet. It did not shatter hulls, it simply silenced them. In the Falcon's turret, Leia's targeting computer screen died. The low hum of the quad lasers faded into absolute silence. The entire ship was dark and powerless. "Han?" she called into her dead headset. No response. Below, in the cockpit, Han slammed his fists on the unresponsive console. "What the? Everything's dead! We're floating!" The Falcon, like all the other initiative ships, was adrift, a sitting duck. The only vessel that remained active was Luke's, a small bastion protected by the deliberate, focused force presence of its 3 occupants. Inside their ship, the view was dire. The living fleet, now unopposed, began to swarm back toward the vulnerable, drifting ships. "We are being overpowered," Ezra shouted, manning the laser cannons. "They are flanking us!" Mara gritted her teeth as enemy fire lit up their cockpit. "They are not trying to destroy us. They are maneuvering, hurting us." Aboard the Chimera, Thrawn watched Luke's single ship fighting against the tide. He gestured to Pelion. "Cut the comms through the initiative fleet. Patch me through to Luke Skywalker, audio and visual." "Connecting," Pelion confirmed. In the cockpit of Luke's ship, the console chimed. A hologram of Thrawn's face, calm and severe, flickered to life above the controls. "Luke Skywalker." Thrawn's voice was calm, intellectual, and amplified, filling the small space. "You fight well. Yet I know you, as I knew him, and I wonder how similar your path will become." Luke's heart dropped into his stomach. The words, the implication that he was somehow following in his father's footsteps, struck him with the force of a physical blow. A cold dread, a fear he had long fought to suppress, momentarily paralyzed him. His focus, the unified force presence that protected their ship, shattered. The console in front of him flickered violently. The low hum of the engines cut out with a sickening finality. The lights in the cockpit died, plunging them into near darkness, broken only by the streaking stars outside and the eerie blue glow of Thrawn's holographic image. From the rear of the ship, the sound of frantic footsteps echoed. The cockpit door hissed open, and Ezra and Mara burst in from opposite sides, their faces etched with alarm. "What happened?" Ezra demanded, his eyes wide. "The cannons just died." Mara did not speak, her gaze instantly locking onto the source of the problem. She saw Luke frozen at the controls, his shoulders tense, his face pale in the ghostly light. He was not looking at them. His wide, horrified eyes were fixed on Thrawn's image. It was a look she had never seen on him before. Not the calm Jedi, master, not the determined warrior, but a man caught in a sudden, profound fear. The unshakable pillar of compassion she had dueled was, for this single moment, shaken to its core. They were now as adrift and powerless as the rest of the fleet. Luke's hand moved from the dead controls to the comm, his voice tight, betraying the tremor he was fighting to control. "Thrawn, your victory is built on terror." "Terror is merely a tool of necessity," Thrawn's voice replied. Luke asked, "If this is about necessity, why this weapon? Why not form an alliance? What is the greater threat you are preparing for?" "You ask the wrong questions," Thrawn stated. "There are forces that exist in the silent spaces between galaxies. They do not build, they do not reason, they consume. They are a tide of absolute negation that scours away life, thought, and memory itself. To them, your republic, your rebellion, your empire, it is all just noise before the silence. I build, for them, I build a wall." "Then why have you not warned the Republic?" Luke pressed. "We could fight this together." "The Republic would not be able to prepare," Thrawn said, his tone one of cold fact. "They could not even form a fleet capable of defeating me on Dathomir. This test proves they are unfit for the war to come. They believe they have won because they survived the initial feeding. They have only proven their inadequacy. Then why use this power to destroy? Luke demanded. You must destroy in order to create, Thrawn said, his tone shifting into something almost intimate and knowing. Something your father understood deeply. I worked with Darth Vader multiple times. Our strategic methods were often aligned, if our long-term goals diverged, and I have always known his great secret. The secrecy surrounding Vader's true identity, Anakin Skywalker, was maintained only by the systematic elimination of all who discovered it. Mara and Ezra glanced at Luke. Ezra's face turned cold with horror. Mara's eyes showed a terrifying understanding of the depth of Thrawn's knowledge and the threat he represented. Thrawn continued relentlessly, I know the necessary violence that drove him to seek order at any cost, and what he did to save your mother. You came here with an army, ready to destroy the source of my necessary strength. You are already compromising your principles for the sake of survival. Perhaps this is where a Jedi such as you belongs. On the field of battle, where the idealism of the past must be sacrificed for the reality of the present. Today, victory is mine. Luke tilted his head down and closed his eyes, filled with a storm of rage and fear. He saw the ghost of his father's mask, felt the shadow of the legacy Thrawn was so coldly describing. He slowly looked back up, his eyes clearing, the storm receding to reveal a core of absolute, unshakable certainty. Luke said, My path ends in redemption, Thrawn, not surrender. He let out his anger, his fear, his frustration. He did not release it as a Sith would, to dominate, but as a Jedi must, to protect. He channeled it all in a controlled blast of pure will. A blinding wave of raw force energy pulsed from his ship, overloading the psychic field and flooding the dead systems around them with a surge of power. The living fleet recoiled, as if struck. On the Millennium Falcon and across the Initiative fleet, lights flickered back to life. The sudden return of power was a physical shock. In the cockpit of Luke's ship, the consoles blazed with light, and the engines roared back to life, pressing them into their seats. The hologram of Thrawn's face, however, did not dissolve. It remained, solid and smiling, his glowing red eyes observing Luke through the electronic medium. Leia's voice, sharp and clear with command, cut over the comm. We are back online! Outside the viewport, the void erupted in flashes of red as the fleet of Calrissian ships pressed on with their attack. Yet the Starforge and the living fleet did not attack. In fact, they started to prepare a hyperspace jump. Luke met Thrawn's gaze, his own still distraught. The moment of fear still obviously there in Luke's eyes. He was defeated. Thrawn's voice filled the cockpit once more, calm and final. Save what remains of your fleet, Jedi, a temporary reprieve. It is the future you are unprepared to face. Goodbye, son of Vader. Then, with a silent, coordinated flash that filled their viewport, the entire Starforge and its thousands of attendant ships vanished, jumping into hyperspace and leaving behind only the empty, expanding cloud of the Dead Star and a fleet with Luke's ship, stationary, in the middle of it.